The theater was already filling with quiet noise when he stepped onto the stage with a broom in his hand. Chairs scraped lightly against the floor. People spoke in low voices, careful not to disturb the calm before the evening program. Lights above the stage glowed softly, warming the empty piano that waited in the center. No one paid much attention to the man sweeping near the edge of the stage. To most people, he was just part of the building, like the curtains or the wooden floor beneath their feet. He moved slowly, not because he was lazy, but because he was tired. His shoulders carried the weight of a long day. He had already cleaned 2 halls earlier that morning and helped unload equipment in the afternoon. This job didn't pay much, but it was steady, and steady mattered when you were raising a child alone. He kept his head down as he worked, eyes focused on the dust gathering near the piano legs. He had learned long ago not to draw attention to himself. Life had taught him that being quiet made things easier. Fewer questions, fewer looks, less explaining. Most people didn't want to hear your story anyway. They just wanted their space clean and ready. A few audience members glanced at him, then looked away. Some assumed he had always done this kind of work. Others barely noticed him at all. None of them knew he had arrived early on purpose, hoping to finish quickly so he could leave on time. His child would be waiting at home with a neighbor, and he hated being late. Every minute mattered. As he swept, his eyes drifted toward the piano. It was an old one, polished but worn, with keys that had been pressed by many hands over the years. He didn't stop sweeping, but his grip tightened slightly on the broom. The piano reminded him of a different time, one that felt both close and far away. There had been years when music filled his life. Back then, his days were measured by practice hours and small performances. He used to believe that hard work and patience were enough to build a future. But life didn't follow that plan. It never really does. Now, music lived quietly inside him. It stayed there while he worked, while he cooked dinner, while he helped with homework late at night. It came out only when the house was silent, when his child was asleep and the world finally slowed down. Those moments were rare, but they kept something alive in him. A staff member walked by and nodded without stopping. He nodded back, polite and quick. He didn't want to be seen as someone who lingered. People like him were expected to finish their work and disappear. He swept closer to the center of the stage. The broom made a soft brushing sound that blended with the low hum of voices from the seats. A faint smell of polish and wood filled the air. Everything felt familiar, yet distant, like watching life through glass. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't take it out right away. He already knew who it would be. When he finally checked, it was a short message asking when he would be home. He typed a quick reply, promising it wouldn't be long. He meant it. Raising a child alone had changed him in ways he never expected. It taught him patience, but it also taught him fear. Fear of falling behind. Fear of failing. Fear of dreaming too big when someone else depended on him. Dreams were risky. Stability was safer. He had once imagined standing on stages like this for different reasons. Not sweeping them, but performing on them. That dream didn't disappear overnight. It faded slowly, pushed aside by bills, schedules, and responsibilities. He didn't blame anyone. Life had simply asked him to choose, and he chose his child every time. Someone in the audience laughed softly. The sound echoed more than it should have, filling the room for a brief second. He paused his sweeping and looked up. The lights made it hard to see faces clearly, but he could feel the presence of so many people watching the empty stage, waiting for something to begin. He felt out of place standing there with a broom while others waited for entertainment. He reminded himself that his job mattered too. A clean stage made everything else possible. Even if no one noticed, the work still counted. He finished one side of the stage and moved toward the piano bench. He carefully swept around it, making sure not to bump anything. His movements were careful, almost respectful. The piano deserved that. For a moment, his mind wandered. He imagined what it would feel like to sit there again, fingers resting on the keys. He remembered the weight of silence before the first note, the way a room could change when music began. He shook the thought away. This wasn't the time. This wasn't his place anymore. A voice from offstage called out, asking how long until the stage was ready. He answered calmly, saying just a few more minutes. His voice was steady, practiced. He had learned how to sound confident even when he felt invisible. As he swept the last corner, his eyes returned to the piano one more time. He didn't know why, but something about it felt different that evening. Maybe it was the quiet anticipation in the room. Maybe it was the way the light fell across the keys. Or maybe it was just one of those moments that feels ordinary until later, when you realize it wasn't. He leaned the broom against the wall and stepped back to check his work. The stage was clean, ready. He had done what he was supposed to do. He could leave now, blend back into the background where he belonged. But instead of walking away immediately, he stood there for a few seconds longer. His hands rested at his sides. His breathing slowed. He listened to the room, to the low noise, to the quiet waiting. No one noticed him standing still. No one expected anything from him beyond what he had already done. And maybe that was why the moment felt heavy, like something unseen was about to happen. He took one last look at the piano, then turned slightly, ready to step off the stage. He didn't know that this simple act of sweeping, this unnoticed moment, was about to lead somewhere he never planned to go. He only knew that for the first time in a long while, his heart was beating a little faster, as if it remembered something he had almost forgotten. After he stepped off the stage, the noise of the theater felt louder. He walked down the narrow hallway behind the curtains, where cables ran along the floor and old posters lined the walls. This area was familiar to him. He had spent more time here than most people ever would. It was the space meant for workers, not performers. He picked up his jacket from a chair and checked the time again. He was still on schedule. That should have brought relief, but his mind felt restless. The image of the piano stayed with him, clearer than he liked. He told himself it was nothing, just a memory passing through. As he walked toward the storage room, he thought about the path that had brought him here. Life had not fallen apart all at once. It had changed slowly, quietly, the way water wears down stone. Years earlier, he used to wake up early for a different reason. Back then, mornings meant practice. His fingers would press the keys while the rest of the house slept. He believed that effort mattered, that if he kept going, something good would come of it. Music gave him structure when everything else felt uncertain. He was never famous. He never expected to be. His dream was simple. He wanted to play, to feel heard, and to earn enough to live with dignity. He played small events, community gatherings, and quiet rooms where people actually listened. Those moments mattered more than applause. Then life shifted. Responsibility arrived without warning and stayed. Becoming a single parent was not part of his plan, but plans rarely survive reality. Someone he trusted was suddenly gone, leaving him with a child and a future that felt heavy overnight. First, he tried to do everything. Work during the day, practice at night, care for his child around the clock. Sleep became a luxury. Slowly, something had to give. Music was the easiest thing to push aside. It didn't cry when ignored. It didn't need food or school supplies. Could wait, he told himself. He took jobs wherever he could find them. Cleaning, moving equipment, helping set up events. He learned how to work quietly and efficiently. People trusted him because he didn't complain and didn't ask for much. That trust helped him keep steady work. At home, life followed a careful routine. He cooked simple meals. He checked homework. He listened to stories about school days and small worries that felt big to a child. At night, when the lights were off and the house was quiet, he sometimes sat at an old keyboard he kept tucked away. He played softly, just enough to remind himself that the music was still there. Those late-night moments were private. He never talked about them. Music felt too personal now, almost fragile. Sharing it again seemed risky. Back at the theater, a staff member passed him in the hallway and mentioned there was a short delay before the program started. He nodded, listening but not really hearing. A delay meant waiting. Waiting meant time. And time had a strange way of opening doors he kept locked. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment. He felt tired, but not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. It was the tiredness of carrying years of responsibility without pause. When he opened his eyes, He heard faint sounds from the stage. People settling in. Someone testing a microphone. The piano remained silent. That silence pulled at him. He walked back toward the stage entrance, telling himself he just wanted to check if anything else needed cleaning. It was a small excuse, but enough to move his feet. From behind the curtain, he looked out at the stage. The piano sat alone under the lights. It looked different now, less distant, almost inviting. A memory surfaced, clear and sharp. He remembered the first time he had played in front of strangers. His hands had shaken then too. Fear and excitement had mixed into something powerful. That feeling had been gone for a long time. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage but stayed hidden. No one seemed to notice him. The audience was distracted, waiting for the event to begin. A few people checked their phones. Others talked quietly. A staff member walked over and spoke to him casually, saying there was still time before the show started. The words slipped out before he could stop them. He mentioned the piano, asking if it was okay. The staff member shrugged, not thinking much of it, and said it was fine as long as nothing was disturbed. That answer lingered in the air. Fine. The word felt heavier than it should have. He stood there, heart beating faster than usual. He told himself no. This wasn't smart. This wasn't necessary. But another voice inside him spoke softly, reminding him of all the times he had stayed silent. He took a slow breath and stepped onto the stage again, this time without the broom. His shoes sounded louder now. A few heads turned, curious but not interested. To them, he was still just a worker moving around. He reached the piano and rested his hand on its edge. The surface felt cool and solid. Real. His fingers twitched slightly, remembering movements they hadn't made in public for years. He didn't sit down yet. He just stood there, breathing, listening to the room. This moment felt fragile, like it could disappear if he moved too quickly. His thoughts went to his child. He imagined telling them about this day later, even if nothing happened. He imagined their small smile, their quiet pride. That image gave him courage. He pulled the bench back gently and sat down. The action felt simple, but it carried the weight of everything he had given up and everything he still carried. The room didn't change right away. People didn't clap. No announcement was made. It was just a man sitting at a piano, unnoticed, with a past full of choices and a heart full of quiet hope. He placed his hands above the keys but didn't press them yet. He closed his eyes for a second, letting the noise fade. He wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. He just wanted to be honest. In that still moment before the first note, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not confidence, not fear, but permission. Permission to try. He lowered his hands toward the keys, unaware that the next few seconds would begin changing everything he thought he knew about his place in the world. He pressed the first key gently, almost as if testing whether the sound was real. A soft note filled the space, light but clear. It floated through the room and settled into the quiet. No one reacted right away. A few people kept talking. Someone coughed. The moment felt fragile, like it could break if he pushed too hard. He played another note, then another, forming a slow pattern. His hands moved carefully, guided by memory rather than thought. Years of practice returned without effort, as if they had been waiting for permission. The piano responded warmly, its sound richer than he expected. A few heads turned. Conversations softened. Someone near the front row leaned forward slightly, curious. Still, no one clapped or spoke. The music was not loud enough to demand attention. It invited it. He let the melody grow, adding depth, letting emotion guide his fingers. This was not a piece he had rehearsed recently. It came from somewhere deeper, shaped by late nights, quiet sacrifices, and love that had no audience. Every note carried weight, but none felt forced. The room slowly changed. The low hum of voices faded. Phones lowered. Eyes shifted toward the stage. People who had expected an ordinary evening found themselves listening without realizing why. He kept his eyes on the keys, not daring to look up. Looking at faces might break his focus. He played as if he were alone, as if the room were empty except for the piano and his thoughts. With each movement of his hands, his confidence grew. Not the kind that seeks approval, but the kind that comes from truth. He wasn't performing to impress. He was playing to release something he had carried for too long. The melody rose and fell, gentle at times, powerful at others. It told a story without words. Some listeners felt warmth. Others felt sadness. A few felt both at once. Everyone felt something. An older woman in the audience wiped her eyes without knowing why. A man near the aisle stopped fidgeting and sat still. A child tugged at a parent's sleeve, whispering a question that went unanswered. On stage, the single father breathed with the music. His shoulders relaxed. His posture changed. The man who had swept the floor minutes earlier now sat fully present, grounded, and alive. He remembered moments from his life as he played, holding his child for the first time, sitting alone at the kitchen table late at night, counting bills, teaching small fingers how to press keys on a cheap keyboard. Each memory flowed into the next, carried by sound. The piano no longer felt like an object. It felt like a bridge between who he had been and who he was now. A staff member stood frozen near the side of the stage, unsure whether to interrupt. This was not on the program, but stopping it suddenly felt wrong. The room was listening. The music grew quieter, then stronger again. His fingers moved faster, then slowed, shaping the moment with care. He trusted himself fully now. Doubt had no space here. People in the audience exchanged looks. Silent understanding passed between strangers. Something unexpected was happening, and everyone felt lucky to be there for it. He reached a part of the melody that felt like a turning point. The sound deepened. Emotion filled the room more fully. The music was no longer background. It had become the center of everything. A few people leaned back in their seats, overwhelmed. Others leaned forward, as if trying to get closer to the sound. No one spoke. For him, time disappeared. There was no stage, no audience, no future worry waiting backstage. There was only this moment, unfolding note by note. When the final part approached, he slowed again. He let the notes breathe. He allowed silence to exist between them, trusting that the room would follow. The last note rang out softly and faded into the air. He lifted his hands from the keys and held them there for a second longer, honoring the silence. The room stayed quiet. Not an awkward quiet, but a deep one. The kind that comes after something meaningful. Then someone clapped. Just one person at first. The sound broke the spell gently. Another clap followed, then another. Within seconds, the room filled with applause. He opened his eyes and looked up, startled. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't thought that far ahead. People were standing now. Some smiled. Some looked emotional. The applause grew louder, warmer, filling the space he had once swept without notice. He stood slowly, unsure of what to do with his hands. He nodded once, a small gesture of thanks, then stepped back from the piano. His face felt warm. His chest felt tight. He hadn't planned to share this part of himself. It had simply happened. A few people called out words of encouragement. He couldn't make them out clearly. The sound blended together, distant and unreal. He walked off the stage quietly, just as he had planned earlier, but everything felt different now. The hallway lights seemed brighter. His steps felt lighter. Behind him, the applause continued for a moment longer before slowly fading. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from release. Something heavy had lifted. He checked his phone again. Another message waited. This one asked how his day was going. He smiled to himself, a small, private smile. He didn't know what would come next. He didn't know if this moment would matter tomorrow or be forgotten by morning. But he knew one thing for sure. He had been seen. Not as a worker. Not as a background figure. But as himself. And that feeling stayed with him as he took a deep breath and prepared to face whatever waited beyond the walls of the theater. He stayed in the hallway for a while, letting the noise fade completely. The applause ended, replaced by the usual sounds of people settling back into their seats. The program was about to begin as planned. Life was moving forward, but he felt slightly behind, as if he had stepped into a moment that didn't fully belong to him. A staff member approached him with a surprised look. The person spoke softly, asking if he was okay. He nodded and said yes. His voice sounded normal even though his chest still felt tight. The staff member smiled and said the music was beautiful. Then they hurried away, pulled back into their responsibilities. He stood there alone again, but it wasn't the same kind of alone as before. Something had shifted. He could feel it in the way his hands rested calmly now, no longer gripping anything for balance. He picked up his jacket and prepared to leave. He didn't want to draw attention or cause confusion. That had never been his role. As he walked toward the exit, a few people passed him and looked twice. Some smiled politely. One person thanked him quietly. He responded with a nod, unsure what to say. Outside, the air felt cooler. The city lights reflected off the pavement, and traffic moved steadily nearby. Everything looked normal, but he felt different inside, like the world had tilted slightly. He walked to the bus stop, replaying the moment in his head. Not the applause, but the silence just before it. That deep pause felt more important than anything else. It was the sound of people listening. On the ride home, his phone buzzed again. This time there were more messages. One was from someone who worked at the theater, saying people were asking about him. Another mentioned that someone had recorded the performance. He stared at the screen for a long moment, unsure how to feel. He didn't reply right away. His mind was already full. When he reached home, the lights were on. He unlocked the door quietly and stepped inside. His child was sitting at the table, drawing something colorful on paper. They looked up and smiled when they saw him. He felt a wave of relief. No matter what happened outside, this was what mattered most. They asked if he was late because of work. He said yes, but added that something unexpected happened. He didn't explain right away. He wasn't sure how. They ate a simple meal together. He listened to stories about school, about a small problem that felt big, about a friend who didn't share properly. He nodded, responded, laughed at the right moments. But part of his mind was still at the piano. After dinner, he helped with homework. Numbers, words, simple questions with clear answers. He liked those moments. They reminded him that not everything in life was uncertain. Later, when the house grew quiet and his child went to bed, he sat alone in the living room. The old keyboard rested against the wall, covered slightly with dust. He hadn't touched it in weeks. He turned it on and pressed a single key. The sound was thin compared to the piano at the theater, but it was familiar. He played softly, not for an audience but for himself. The music felt different now. Lighter, less guarded. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered. Someone asked if he would consider playing again someday. The message was respectful, not demanding. He read it twice. He thought about his routine, his responsibilities, his fears. Then he thought about the silence before the applause. He replied honestly, saying he didn't know, but thanked them for asking. Over the next few days, small changes followed. People at work treated him differently, though not unkindly. Some asked questions. Others simply smiled more. The theater manager mentioned that the video had been shared online and was getting attention. He listened quietly, careful not to let his hopes run ahead of reality. At home, he didn't change much. He still woke early. He still worked long hours. He still packed lunches and checked homework. But something had softened inside him. The weight felt more balanced now. One evening, his child asked him to play the piano again. Not at the theater. At home. He agreed. They sat together, sharing the bench, fingers touching keys randomly at first, then finding a simple tune. He realized then that the moment on stage wasn't just about being seen by strangers. It was about allowing himself to be seen by the person who mattered most. Days passed. Messages slowed but didn't stop. Opportunities were mentioned carefully, without promises. He stayed cautious. Life had taught him that sudden attention could fade quickly. But something else remained. Confidence. Not loud or bold, but steady. One afternoon, as he swept the stage again, the piano didn't feel distant anymore. Felt familiar, like a friend waiting patiently. He didn't play that day. He didn't need to. Knowing that he could was enough. He finished his work and stepped back, just as he had before. The stage was clean, ready. This time, when he walked away, he didn't feel invisible. He felt grounded, present, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to wonder carefully and quietly what might come next. The days that followed felt ordinary on the surface, but something inside him had changed. He moved through his routine with the same discipline as before, yet there was a quiet confidence in his steps. He no longer rushed through moments just to survive them. He noticed things now. Small sounds, small joys, small chances. At work, people still expected him to sweep, clean, and prepare the stage. He did those things carefully, the same way he always had. But now, when he passed the piano, he didn't feel like an outsider. It felt like part of his world again, not something locked away. One afternoon, the theater manager asked him to stay after his shift. The request was calm, respectful, no pressure. They talked about the night of the performance, about how people had responded, about how the video kept being shared, not because it was flashy, but because it felt real. The manager didn't promise fame or sudden success. Instead, they offered something small but meaningful, an invitation to play before a local event the following month. No spotlight, no big expectations, just music. He didn't answer right away. He asked for time to think. At home that night, he sat at the table while his child worked on a school project. He watched the way they concentrated, tongue pressed lightly against their lip, completely focused. That look reminded him of himself years ago. He thought about what he wanted to teach, not just through words, but through example. Later, when his child asked why he seemed quiet, he told them about the invitation. He explained it carefully without making it sound bigger than it was. Their eyes widened. They smiled in a way that made his chest ache. They said they wanted to hear him play again. On a real stage. That settled it. He accepted the invitation the next day. Practice returned to his life slowly. He didn't push himself the way he once had. He played when he could. Early mornings, late nights, sometimes just a few minutes at a time. Music fit into his life instead of fighting against it. He stayed tired, but it was a different kind of tired now. Purpose had a way of softening exhaustion. The night of the event arrived quietly. No big crowd, no pressure, just a familiar stage, clean and ready. Before he played, he stood where he once swept, broom in hand, and smiled at the memory. That version of himself wasn't gone. He was still there, still working, still providing, but he was no longer invisible. When he sat at the piano this time, the room was already listening. He played simply, honestly. He didn't chase perfection. He let the music breathe. He let mistakes pass without fear. People responded not with loud reactions, but with attention. When it ended, the applause was gentle but sincere. He stepped off the stage feeling calm, complete. Life didn't change overnight. Bills still arrived. Work continued. Parenting remained demanding, but balance had returned. The video eventually slowed its spread. Messages became fewer. He was fine with that. He had never wanted noise. He wanted meaning. Music became part of his identity again, not as a dream that demanded sacrifice, but as a truth that gave strength. On weekends, he played at home. Sometimes his child joined in, pressing random keys, laughing at the sounds they made together. Those moments mattered more than any stage. One evening, as he tucked his child into bed, they asked him if he was happy. He thought about the question carefully. He answered honestly. He said yes, not because everything was easy, but because he finally felt like himself again. After the lights were off, he sat alone for a moment, listening to the quiet. The same quiet that once felt heavy now felt peaceful. He understood something then. That night on the stage was never about proving anything. It wasn't about surprise or applause. It was about remembering who he was. And sometimes that is enough to change a life.